Yeah, you better. Yeah, you better.
Alright guys, we're not going to have our typical video today because we don't have our typical subject. Unfortunately, we're going to be talking about the school shooting that took place in Minneapolis at Annunciation Catholic School. And I'm going to get into the facts of this school shooting, and I'll be referencing some notes here, so apologies in advance, but I don't want to misspeak on anything that's taken place. And we're going to have hopefully a nuanced discussion about the politics behind this, the back and forth debates, and the response to this as of late. Now, firstly, before we get into any of that, it's unfortunate that this shooting has claimed the lives of two children, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I cannot imagine the utter devastation that families are experiencing right now, that those two children experienced, that peers of these children experienced, the community at large in Minneapolis, all of the city, it seems, is mourning right now. 17 others were also injured in this shooting, many of whom are children. So it's just, we cannot speak to the catastrophic nature of what's taken place. Now, the shooter has been identified as 23-year-old Robin Westman, and Robin Westman took his life with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, apparently at the scene of this shooting. Okay, so it's always interesting. I never know what to say when things like this take place. People give thoughts, they give prayers, whatever belief system you have, you're sharing that, and then people debate back and forth, and they scream at you over your beliefs or say your thoughts and prayers are not enough. There's, of course, the consistent conversations about banning assault rifles, as we're now calling them, at least in the political sphere of things. There's conversations about mental health. There's conversations about catching these early signs with people who are seemingly going to go on to be school shooters. And this Robin Westman individual showed plenty of signs, it seems, of being a person that's going to go on to commit an act like this. We are going to talk about the identity of the shooter in this video. And I know some people are conflicted about that, whether or not we share pictures, whether or not we talk about this individual. I may or may not share pictures in this video, but we're certainly going to talk about their identity, because this person identified as trans. And disclaimer, I am not going to make this a video to villainize the trans community, to say that all trans people are violent, that all of them are going to go on to commit acts like this, but we are going to talk about the mental health aspect of this. We are going to talk about, psychiatric comorbidities that are often coupled with the trans identity. We are going to talk about how an individual like this may go on to commit a crime like this. And this is not the first time we've seen this take place. There have been several stories of trans shooters. There's pretty substantial stats on trans shooters. We had Audrey Hale at the Covenant shooting in Nashville in 2023, who was a trans shooter, male to female, I believe, that transitioner. So here we are with yet another case of this taking place. Now let's get into some facts here. The manifesto of this individual included pride flags, and his gun had "Kill Trump" either etched or written on it. This person was clearly dedicated to, it seems, a left-leaning ideology, a pro-trans ideology, a pro-LGBT ideology, and an anti-Trump ideology. Now, New York Times even confirms that this person identified as trans. I know there's been speculation and debate over that. Some people were saying online and having it go viral that this person is a white nationalist. I don't understand that, but I'll read you what the New York Times said. They said, according to court records, Robin Westman's mother, Mary Grace Westman, submitted a petition to change her child's name in November of 2019. A judge granted the petition in January 2020 and wrote in an order making the name change official. Quote, minor child identifies as a female and wants her name to reflect that identification. At the time, Robin Westman was 17. So we're talking about somebody who's transitioned as a minor, which there's already, so much debate and speculation about transitioning as adults, what that does for the mental health. There are several studies that communicate that even post-transition, transgender individuals still struggle with mental health. They still have one of the highest rates of suicide of any demographic here in the US and abroad. And when you transition them as minors, I think you are really adding fuel to the flame and to the fire there. It's a much worse situation. And as we have stated here, Robin Westman was 17 at the time of this court-ordered name change. So you can only imagine the sort of mental turmoil that somebody's experiencing at this time. And again, the psychiatric comorbidities that are coupled with the trans identity often, when we have minors and adults identifying as trans. Now, there's been some talk about the alleged manifesto of this individual. Andy No says that one of the core elements of this manifesto was an idea of death before detransition. He writes, this is literally what the Minneapolis mass shooter of church children believed. In his manifesto, he has a page expressing some regret about transitioning. He was a minor, but that it was too late for him and he was going to kill and die, death before detransition. So if this ends up being confirmed by authorities, and if we find that this is indeed true, you have this sentiment of not only childhood gender dysphoria, but a regret of that dysphoria, or at least the medical transition and social transition of that dysphoria. Now, I'm not sure about this person having undergone surgeries or hormone therapy or things of that nature. We don't have many conclusive reports, at least at the time of me filming this right now. But we often see this with transgender people, this idea of wanting to detransition. And depending on what stage you are in your transition, it can become more and more difficult to recognize the regret, to act on the regret, and many of them feel as though there is no space to act on the regret, considering they've gone so far. You have a court-ordered name change. Some of them are on hormone therapy, puberty blockers. Others have already undergone surgical transition, which is, quite beyond. It's experimental at this point. It's an experimental surgery, essentially. It's a mutilative surgery. And once people have sort of gone down this track and realized that there is some regret in regard to that identity, I can imagine it's a very difficult track to get off of. So this idea of death before detransition is not necessarily shocking. The shocking part is to go into a school and take children's lives with you. And it's absolutely ridiculous. There are other reports that this individual had a photo of Jesus on some sort of target that they were shooting at or intending it to, or trying to maybe make some sort of visual representation of their ideology. There are other alleged reports of this person saying, "Where is your God?" or at least having that written somewhere, or written on their firearm. And we're going to get into leadership response to this. Now, the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey, has been talking about this shooting, of course. When these things happen in your community, they bring out all of your administrators, they bring out your mayor, and they are now front and center on the news to talk about what's taken place and to respond to this. The same goes for law enforcement. Now, they've made a point of talking about this transgender identity, and Jacob Frey has chosen to respond by saying we shouldn't attack the trans community. I do agree with that, okay? You should not go around attacking innocent trans people for the actions of an individual that is a part of this community, but we cannot have conversations about what's happened here without having a conversation about the trans identity, about psychological comorbidities, about the mental health and the mental map that exists with these individuals oftentimes when they are experiencing gender dysphoria and when they have chosen to transition. We can also not ignore the political ideology that reinforces this identity. And whether you believe it's the chicken or the egg, it doesn't really matter. The conversation still must be had. Now we're going to turn to what Jacob Frey, again, the mayor of Minneapolis, had to say on CNN.
When you talk about compassion, I don't want to tiptoe around the edge of this, but the shooter's name was in question, the gender of the shooter. No one's really sure what's going on there. 5 years ago it was Robert, then a name change to Robin. Okay. This is being seized in all corners, as you can imagine, in all sorts of ways. And you know that, Mayor. And perhaps that's why when you spoke about this so profoundly and powerfully as you are even here now, but when you spoke about this today publicly, you voiced concern for the transgender community, for the community overall. And obviously you chose to do that in that moment because you thought it was important. And I wanted to give you a chance to say why you felt it was important to do that in that moment.
Obviously, I've heard about the rhetoric and the narrative that is being pushed out. But here's the thing. Anybody that is going to use this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any community has lost touch with a common humanity. We got to be operating not out of hate for any group, but out of a love for our children. That's where the focus needs to be right now. A love for our kids, seeing these kids not just as somebody else's kids, this horrific thing happened, but what if it was our own? How would we feel then? So, look, we need to be standing up for every community out there, a Catholic community too, by the way. I mean, any community that suffers this kind of blow, our Minneapolis community, you got to stand up for them. But, I feel oftentimes in these instances, there's this desire to villainize a group. You want to call this an act of cowardice? Do it, because it is. But regardless of what group or background, gender. The bottom line is that kids got killed. Let's love each other more. Let's love each other more, because the antidote to hate is not more hate. Hurt people, and the antidote to hate is a whole lot more love. That's where we all need to be going right now.
Well, Mayor Fry, I'm grateful to you.
Okay. So let's pause there. I mean, he's simply just throwing out a bunch of cliches and buzzwords at this point. I would push back and say that what is an idea of love? Is it love and compassion to actually hopefully try to save somebody from an ideology that we are finding could lead to violent acts like this? And this is not to villainize the trans community, but when you see somebody who literally villainizes themselves, this is what this shooter has done, who happens to be trans, and we cannot divorce the trans ideology from this shooting in itself, because this person is trying to let you know that the shooting is informed by that ideology. That is love, to discuss these things. And what we're hoping for is obviously less dead children, but we're also hoping for an ideology that seems to have contributed to this to be talked about, discussed, mitigated, okay? Because this is a mental health issue. It is a mental health crisis. That does not mean all trans people are violent, but it does mean that there is some sort of not missed connection with reality, the reality of gender, the reality of sex, the reality of just the world that we live in. And there's a mental health impact that comes with that. And if we're not able to discuss that, we are going to continue to be on the wrong track. This is an eerily similar shooting to the shooting that took place in Nashville at the Covenant School. Eerily similar. You have a male to female transitioner who is targeting Christian children and has done so successfully. And we're not going to talk about the fact that these ideologies are informing these actions, these heinous actions. You can't. You can't not talk about that. So it's really interesting to see somebody try to deflect from that conversation. And I can understand if you are a leftist or huge supporter of the LGBTQ plus community or the trans community, how you might be worried that this is going to create massive hate for all trans people, or you might be worried that all trans people are going to be lumped into this. But I implore you to try to have the conversation with nuance rather than deflecting, rather from trying to change the subject, rather from saying that we need love and not hate, which is true. And that's what we're attempting to do. Try to have the conversation in a nuanced way. Showing up to the table to discuss it, because it is very real. And things like this, until we tackle the issue, I think are unfortunately going to continue to happen. So it takes bridging the gap between the two sides of the aisle to have this discussion. I mean, we're talking about a group that mental health wise is not doing that well. And when you're doing not well mentally, when you have poor mental health, that not only impacts you, but it impacts the members of your community who you inflict that on in whatever way, shape, or form that you are doing that. And to not be able to have that conversation is ridiculous. Now, they reference a moment where the mayor, I guess very boldly said to protect the trans community. Let's watch that clip.
All of us. And I have heard about a whole lot of hate that's being directed at our trans community. Anybody who is using this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any other community out there has lost their sense of common humanity. We should not be operating out of a place of hate for anyone.
Okay, so he basically says the same thing. True, I guess, but like that, it's very interesting place to put your focus in this moment, rather than talking about the facts of the matter and talking about how this impacts just everybody who has experienced this. It impacts the entire community. And we always have this back and forth. I remember when the Nashville shooting happened, there were some people saying like, oh my gosh, it's wonderful. At least they took out Christian children or something like that. When there was the flooding in Texas and all those Christian children died, people were cheering that on and talking about it being the repercussions of voting for Donald Trump or some just bullshit like that. It's just crazy. And then, of course, you have some people on the right who, I guess, label the entire trans community in instances like this. Although I tend to veer on the side of having more nuanced discussion and follow people who are having nuanced discussions about the impact of this. It's just an endless cycle, it seems, all the time. And until we cut through the bullshit and actually have this discussion, nothing is going to get done. This individual showed signs of being a school shooter or turning into somebody who was going to be a school shooter. They were active on social media. They clearly had very poor mental health. This ideology, they were carrying it around with them. And whether you like it or not, a very early indicator of poor mental health for children is the experience of gender dysphoria and this want to transition. That does not mean every child who experiences gender dysphoria is an early sign school shooter. It absolutely doesn't mean that. But if we cannot discuss the fact that this person is informed by their trans ideology, and the trans ideology is a large part of the pie in this heinous crime, then we can't have a real discussion about it. So until that takes place, I don't know what else to say. Now, you have your Minnesota lieutenant governor dressing like this. Here's the photo. It says protect trans kids, and it has a lovely cartoon animated knife, drawn knife, whatever, on the shirt. I mean, what is that supposed to mean? What is that supposed to say? Protect with a knife, okay, our trans kids. Now, there's other clips of Minneapolis leadership talking about this trans issue, and I'll show you her speaking with this t-shirt on.
Because let's be clear, this is life-affirming and life-saving healthcare. When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them.
Okay, you heard that, and you heard the sparse claps, I guess, in the background there. Think about this reality. You are a young child who is experiencing gender dysphoria. You believe that you are trapped in the wrong body. You want to socially transition. You want to medically transition. You live in a world where some people are accepting of this, some people aren't, others are confused. You're around young children because you are literally a minor. You're around a group of people who probably couldn't understand this less, okay? So you're going to experience the impact of that mixed with the impact of your poor mental health. You are watching politicians on the internet or on TV, on the news, wearing protect trans kids shirts with knives on them and thinking that your identity, which you believe is sacred to who you are, is somehow hanging in the balance of who is in political power. You feel that your life is threatened by the very nature of existing, of waking up each day, okay? And you think that one of the main people, one of your main enemies happens to be Christian individuals, because a lot of the pushback to trans people happens to be informed by those who are religious in many instances. What do you think your target's gonna be, okay? And when you mix that with the poor mental health of having a transgender identity, which again has the highest rate of suicide of virtually any other demographic here in the United States, you're already leaning on a path towards self-harm with the identity itself, self-harm from a mental health standpoint, an actual infliction of self-harm, suicidal ideation, which is often coupled with this identity and the other psychiatric comorbidities that these people experience. And when you go on to harm yourself, are you going to want to impact the villains of your life as well? The people who couldn't protect your trans identity that is now being, they're being cast on the internet and on the news, and you're watching politicians fight for your identity and fight for your life, or at least that's what they're telling you. It seems like a perfect cocktail to make something like this happen. And I'm not accusing this of being some like created thing by the government. I've seen some people share those theories. I don't know. All I know is when I see the puzzle pieces and I put them together, it looks like these situations could be very easily brought about with our sort of political propaganda that we're sharing, with the conversations we're having surrounding this identity, with the lack of clarity about the mental health of these individuals. While other countries, Sweden, Finland, France, Germany, they're all figuring out this impact. They're all figuring out that we should not be socially or medically transitioning children. They're all figuring out that over time, even through transition, these individuals are choosing to take their own lives and in some instances, take people with them. So why is it that other areas are figuring this out and we can't? I have to leave with that question. I'm dumbfounded by this stuff. And how many more stories like this does it take to figure it out? Is gun control restrictions going to fix this? Doesn't seem like it. Doesn't seem like it would have stopped this. Do I think catching early signs of school shooters would have caught this? And it seems so strange to me that nearly every time this happens, we have a log of like data, information, social media posts of these individuals being clear cases for committing an act like this. And I don't want to become overwhelmed and start a screaming match. I'm sure we're getting enough screaming matches on the internet over this, but it's just dumbfounding to me how many of these individuals slip through the cracks and go unnoticed. And I don't know how it's taking place. And I have a feeling we're going to find out with this individual. Again, this is just speculation. I don't know this to be true. We're going to find out that there's just a treasure trove of more info and more signs that this individual was going to do what they did. So we'll keep an eye out for that news. I'm going to close out with a statement actually from Melania Trump, who has been really sharing big statements of clarity in this moment. And That's how we'll close out today. She says the tragic mass killing in Minnesota illuminates the need for preemptive intervention and identifying potential school shooters. Early warning signs are often evident, with many individuals exhibiting concerning behaviors and making violent threats online prior to their actions. To prevent future tragedies, it is crucial we look into behavioral threat assessments across all levels of society, beginning in our homes, extending through school districts, and of course, social media platforms. Being aware of these warning signs and acting quickly can save lives and make American communities safer. I think a wonderful, clear-cut, concise statement on this issue. Again, this has got to be devastating for anybody involved, anybody who's even heard this. I'm sure it's just not what you want to be hearing on any given day. And my thoughts are with everybody who is going through the turmoil and devastation of an act like this. And hopefully we can find it within ourselves to do something about it. I mean, how many more of these endless conversations can we have before something gets done? Guys, that's today's video. And that's it. Thank you for watching, I guess. And I will see you guys tomorrow.
Yeah, you better. Yeah, you better.